My name is Penelope Richardson, and 5 years ago, I was just another face in the sea of cubicles at Morrison Tech Solutions in downtown Seattle. The rain was drumming against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 32nd floor office that October morning when I first pitched what would become the most successful project in the company's history. Back then, though, nobody wanted to hear it. I remember clutching my presentation folder so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and the faint scent of someone's leftover lunch. Around the mahogany table sat 12 executives, their faces ranging from politely disinterested to outright skeptical. At the head of the table, our CEO, Marcus Webb, glanced at his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. "Penelope," he said, not looking up from his phone, "you have 10 minutes. Make it count." I had been working in the sustainability department for 3 years, watching as our company spent millions on outdated energy systems, while preaching about environmental responsibility in our annual reports. The irony wasn't lost on me, and neither was the opportunity I had identified. What if I told you we could cut our operational costs by 45% while becoming the first major tech company to achieve true carbon neutrality? I began, my voice steadier than I felt inside. That got their attention. Phones went down, eyes looked up, and I saw the first flicker of interest in the room. I launched into my presentation about implementing a comprehensive smart building automation system that would revolutionize how we managed energy consumption across our entire corporate campus. The idea had come to me during one of my late nights in the office. I had noticed how the lights stayed on in empty conference rooms, how the heating system ran at full blast even when entire floors were vacant, and how our servers operated at maximum capacity regardless of actual demand. It was like watching money literally evaporate into the Seattle sky. My proposal was ambitious: integrate AI-driven sensors throughout all 15 buildings of our campus, create a centralized system that could predict and adjust energy usage in real time, and partner with local renewable energy providers to create a self-sustaining power grid. The initial investment would be substantial, but the long-term savings and revenue potential were enormous. "The technology exists," I explained, clicking through my carefully prepared slides. "What we're missing is the vision to implement it at this scale. We could license this system to other corporations, create a new revenue stream, and position Morrison Tech as the leader in sustainable business practices." That's when the pushback began. "Penelope, this is completely outside our core competencies," said Sandra Mills, our chief operating officer. Her voice carried that patronizing tone I had heard so many times before. "We're a software company, not an energy management firm. The initial investment alone would require board approval," added Chief Financial Officer David Chen, shaking his head. "We're talking about what? 15 million? 20 million? For something completely unproven at this scale." "Unproven?" I countered, feeling my confidence building despite their resistance. "Google reduced their data center cooling costs by 40% using similar technology. Microsoft is already implementing smart building systems across their campuses. We're not pioneers here. We're falling behind." Marcus Webb finally looked up from his phone, his gray eyes meeting mine across the table. "Penelope, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this sounds like a fantasy. A very expensive fantasy. Our shareholders expect us to focus on our core business, not chase after some green energy pipe dream." The room fell silent except for the sound of rain intensifying against the windows. I could feel my carefully constructed argument crumbling around me, but I wasn't ready to give up. "What if we started small?" I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. "One building, a pilot program, prove the concept before scaling up." "Even a pilot program would cost millions," David replied, already closing his laptop. "Money we don't have for experimental projects that don't align with our strategic objectives." Sandra leaned forward, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Penelope, you're talented, and we value your contributions to the sustainability department. But this is just too big, too risky, and frankly, too far outside your area of expertise. Why don't you focus on the recycling initiative we discussed last quarter?" I felt heat rising in my cheeks, a combination of embarrassment and frustration. Here I was, proposing a solution that could transform our entire company, and they wanted me to go back to organizing paper recycling bins. "I've spent 18 months researching this," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I've run the numbers, consulted with engineers, talked to vendors. This isn't some half-baked idea I came up with over the weekend." "I'm sure you have," Marcus said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "But the answer is no. We appreciate your passion, Penelope, but we need to stay focused on what we do best." As the executives filed out of the conference room, chatting among themselves about their lunch plans, I remained seated, staring at my presentation folder. 3 months of work, countless late nights, and hundreds of pages of research, dismissed in less than 15 minutes. Sandra was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "Penelope, a word of advice? Sometimes the best ideas are the ones that seem impossible. But in the corporate world, feasibility matters more than vision. Maybe it's time to think smaller." The conference room felt cavernous after everyone left. Through the windows, I could see the Seattle skyline stretching out toward Elliott Bay, the Space Needle barely visible through the gray October clouds. Somewhere in this city were companies that would understand the value of what I was proposing. Somewhere were executives who wouldn't dismiss innovation simply because it required courage to implement. But I wasn't anywhere else. I was here, at Morrison Tech, where my direct supervisor had just told me to think smaller, when everything inside me was screaming to think bigger. I gathered my materials and walked back to my cubicle, passing colleagues who offered sympathetic smiles and knowing looks. News traveled fast in our office, and by the time I reached my desk, I was sure everyone knew about my spectacular failure in the boardroom. That evening, I sat in my Capitol Hill apartment, rain streaking down the windows as I stared at my laptop screen. The smart building automation proposal was still open, cursor blinking on the final page. I could delete it, move on, and focus on the smaller, safer projects that Sandra had suggested. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, I opened a new document and began typing. Alternative Implementation Strategy, Phase 1. If Morrison Tech wouldn't fund my vision, I would find another way to make it happen. They had called it unfeasible, but I knew they were wrong. What I didn't know yet was that their rejection would force me to think even bigger than I had originally dared to imagine. 6 months after that disastrous board meeting, I was sitting in a cramped coffee shop in Fremont, rain pelting the windows as I waited for my third potential investor meeting of the week. My savings account was nearly empty. I had taken a leave of absence from Morrison Tech, and my parents were convinced I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. The coffee shop buzzed with the usual Seattle energy. Freelancers typing furiously on laptops, artists sketching in oversized notebooks, and entrepreneurs like me chasing dreams that everyone else thought were impossible. The smell of fresh roasted coffee mixed with the dampness that seemed to permeate everything in this city during the winter months. I checked my phone for the 100th time. Elena Vasquez, the founder of Northwest Clean Energy Solutions, was running late. This was my last shot for the month and, frankly, my last shot period. If Elena wasn't interested in partnering with me, I would have to return to Morrison Tech with my tail between my legs and pretend that Sandra Mills had been right all along. The door chimed, and a woman in her 50s walked in, scanning the room until her eyes met mine. Elena Vasquez looked exactly like her LinkedIn photo. Short gray hair, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of confident posture that suggested she had built her company from nothing and wasn't impressed by much. "Penelope Richardson?" she asked, extending her hand as she approached my corner table. "That's me," I replied, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me." Elena settled into the chair across from me, declining my offer to buy her coffee. "I'll be honest with you, Penelope. I almost canceled this meeting. Your email was intriguing, but what you're proposing sounds extremely ambitious for someone with no experience running a startup." I had heard variations of this sentiment from every potential investor, partner, and advisor I had approached over the past 6 months. The message was always the same: great idea, wrong person to execute it. "You're right," I said, surprising her with my directness. I don't have startup experience. I don't have a track record of bringing products to market or managing large-scale implementations. What I do have is 3 years of watching a major corporation waste millions of dollars on inefficient systems while claiming to care about sustainability. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying my face. Go on. I opened my laptop and pulled up a revised version of my presentation, one that had evolved significantly since that October morning in the Morrison Tech boardroom. Morrison Tech spends $8.7 million annually on energy costs across their 15-building campus. Based on my analysis, we could reduce that by at least 40% in the first year alone, with even greater savings as the system learns and optimizes. And Morrison Tech said no to this proposal? They called it unfeasible, too expensive, too risky, too far outside their core competencies. I clicked to the next slide, showing potential market size. What they didn't realize is that their rejection gave me something even more valuable than their funding, a real-world case study and the freedom to think bigger. Elena's eyes sharpened with interest. Bigger how? Instead of just implementing this system for one company, what if we created a scalable solution that could be deployed across multiple corporate campuses? Morrison Tech's campus is actually perfect for a pilot program because of its size and complexity. If we can prove the concept there, we can replicate it anywhere. I spent the next 30 minutes walking Elena through my revised business plan. Instead of asking Morrison Tech to fund and implement the project themselves, I was proposing to do it for them, using external funding and partnerships. They would provide the campus and access, we would provide the expertise and investment, and everyone would share in the substantial cost savings. The beauty of this model, I explained, is that it removes the risk from the client while providing us with proof of concept that we can use to attract additional clients. Morrison Tech gets reduced energy costs with no upfront investment. We get a showcase project and a revenue stream. It's a win-win scenario. Elena was quiet for several minutes, studying the financial projections on my screen. Outside, the Seattle rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and I found myself holding my breath as I waited for her response. Your numbers are compelling, she finally said. But implementation is where most projects like this fail. Smart building automation isn't just about installing sensors and software. It requires deep integration with existing systems, ongoing maintenance, and constant optimization. Do you have the technical expertise to manage that? This was the question I had been preparing for since my first failed investor meeting. No, I don't. But I know who does. I told Elena about Dr. James Thornton, a former MIT professor who had been consulting on smart building projects for the past decade. I had reached out to him 3 months earlier, and after several long phone conversations, he had agreed to join the project as Chief Technology Officer if I could secure funding and a pilot client. James has implemented similar systems for office complexes in Boston and Austin, I continued. His track record is impressive, and he's passionate about the environmental impact potential. The missing piece has been finding the right pilot project at the right scale. Elena nodded slowly. And you think Morrison Tech is that pilot project? I know they are. I understand their systems, their culture, and their pain points. More importantly, I know that despite their initial rejection, they're under increasing pressure from shareholders and environmental groups to improve their sustainability metrics. Our proposal solves their problem without requiring them to risk their own capital. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from technical specifications to market positioning to revenue-sharing models. By the time Elena finished her second cup of coffee, I could see that she was genuinely intrigued by the opportunity. Here's what I'm thinking, she said, leaning forward. Northwest Clean Energy has been looking for a way to expand into commercial smart building solutions. We have the renewable energy partnerships and some of the technical infrastructure, but we've been missing the automation and optimization components that you're proposing. My heart started beating faster. This sounded like the beginning of a yes. I'm willing to partner with you on this project, Elena continued. But I have conditions. First, we start with a detailed feasibility study and system design specifically for the Morrison Tech campus. Second, You need to secure their agreement to participate in the pilot program before we commit any significant resources. Third, Dr. Thornton needs to be fully on board and available to lead the technical implementation. And if all those conditions are met? Elena smiled for the first time since she had walked into the coffee shop. Then Northwest Clean Energy will provide the initial funding and technical partnerships necessary to make this happen. We're talking about a $2 million investment to start, with the potential for much more if the pilot program succeeds. I felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over me. After months of rejection and skepticism, someone finally understood the potential of what I was proposing. But even as I shook Elena's hand to seal our preliminary agreement, I knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Convincing Morrison Tech to participate in a pilot program for the same project they had rejected 8 months earlier would require more than just better numbers and external funding. It would require me to prove that sometimes the most unfeasible ideas are simply ideas whose time hasn't come yet. As I walked out of the coffee shop into the gray Seattle afternoon, rain immediately soaking my jacket, I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Sandra Mills's office. This is Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. It's Penelope Richardson. I was wondering if I could schedule a meeting with Sandra to discuss a new proposal. There was a pause. Penelope? I thought you were on leave. I am, but I have something that I think Morrison Tech would be very interested in hearing about. 3 weeks later, I found myself back in the Morrison Tech building, but this time I wasn't walking into the meeting alone. Dr. James Thornton had flown in from Boston the night before, and Elena Vasquez had cleared her entire afternoon to join the presentation. As we rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I tried to calm my nerves by focusing on how different everything felt compared to that October morning 9 months earlier. The biggest change wasn't in the building or the conference room, which looked exactly the same. The difference was in me. 9 months of rejection, research, and relationship building had transformed my ambitious but vague idea into a concrete, fundable, implementable solution. I was no longer asking Morrison Tech to take a leap of faith. I was offering them a proven path to success. Sandra Mills greeted us at the elevator with the same polite smile she had given me during our last conversation, but I could see curiosity in her eyes. Word had spread through the company that I was returning with external partners and funding, which was unusual enough to generate genuine interest among the executive team. Penelope, it's good to see you again, Sandra said, shaking hands with each of us. I have to admit, I'm intrigued by this proposal. It's not often that former employees return with venture capital backing. Northwest Clean Energy isn't venture capital, Elena corrected gently. We're an established energy solutions company looking to expand our commercial services. Penelope's proposal represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want to support. As we walked toward the conference room, I noticed that the executive team assembled for this meeting was different from the one that had dismissed my original presentation. Marcus Webb was still there, of course, along with Sandra and David Chen. But they had also invited Rebecca Walsh, the VP of Operations, and surprisingly, Tom Morrison himself, the company founder and chairman of the board. Tom Morrison was a legend in Seattle tech circles, a soft-spoken man in his 70s who had built Morrison Tech from a 2-person startup into a Fortune 500 company. He rarely attended operational meetings anymore, preferring to focus on strategic vision and philanthropy. His presence in the room signaled that my return had generated more interest than I had expected. Mr. Morrison, I said, extending my hand as we entered the conference room. I'm honored that you're taking time to hear our proposal. Please, call me Tom, he replied, his handshake firm despite his age. I've been following your work since Sandra mentioned your original presentation last year. I'm curious to see how your thinking has evolved. The rain had given way to rare October sunshine, streaming through the conference room windows and casting Seattle's skyline in golden light. As I set up my laptop and connected to the room's display system, I felt a calm confidence that had been absent during my first presentation. 9 months ago, I came to this room with an idea, I began, looking around the table at faces that ranged from skeptical to genuinely curious. Today, I'm returning with a solution. I clicked to the first slide, which showed a side-by-side comparison of my original proposal and our current implementation plan. When you told me that smart building automation was too expensive, too risky, and too far outside Morrison Tech's core competencies, you were absolutely right. My mistake was asking you to become an energy management company instead of proposing to solve your energy management problems. Marcus Webb leaned forward, already more engaged than he had been during our previous meeting. What's the difference? The difference is partnership, Elena interjected, standing to address the room. Northwest Clean Energy specializes in exactly the kind of large-scale energy optimization that Penelope originally proposed. We have the technical expertise, the vendor relationships, and the capital necessary to implement and maintain these systems. What we need is the right pilot project to demonstrate scalability. Dr. Thornton opened his laptop and pulled up a detailed technical schematic of the Morrison Tech campus. I've spent the past 6 weeks analyzing your building's energy consumption patterns, HVAC systems, and electrical infrastructure. The optimization potential is even greater than Penelope's original estimates suggested. For the next 45 minutes, we walked through a comprehensive implementation plan that addressed every concern that had been raised during my original presentation. Instead of asking Morrison Tech to invest $15 million, we were proposing a partnership where Northwest Clean Energy would provide all upfront capital in exchange for a percentage of the energy cost savings. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, David Chen said, studying the financial projections. Northwest Clean Energy invests $2 million to install and configure the smart building system. Morrison Tech provides access and cooperation, but no upfront investment. We split the energy cost savings 60-40, with the larger share going to Morrison Tech. That's correct, I confirmed. And based on our conservative projections, Morrison Tech would save approximately $3.2 million in the first year alone, while Northwest Clean Energy would recoup their initial investment and begin generating profit. What's the catch? Sandra asked, her tone more curious than skeptical. This sounds almost too good to be true. Elena smiled. The catch is that we need Morrison Tech to be a true partner, not just a client. This isn't a simple vendor relationship where we install equipment and walk away. Success requires ongoing collaboration, data sharing, and a willingness to be featured as a case study for future clients. Tom Morrison had been quiet throughout most of the presentation, occasionally asking technical questions but mostly observing. Now he spoke up for the first time since introductions. Penelope, I'm curious about something, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary in Seattle business circles. 9 months ago, you believed in this idea enough to risk your career pursuing it. What did you learn during that time that makes you even more confident now? The room fell silent as everyone waited for my answer. This was the moment I had been preparing for, not just during the past 3 weeks, but during every rejection, every failed investor meeting, and every moment of doubt over the past 9 months. I learned that great ideas aren't enough, I said, looking directly at Tom. Implementation is everything. 9 months ago, I had a vision, but no plan for execution. I was asking you to take a leap of faith based on my enthusiasm rather than proven capability. I clicked to a slide showing photos from Dr. Thornton's previous projects. Today, I'm offering you a partnership with people who have already proven they can deliver results. James has successfully implemented smart building systems that have reduced energy costs by an average of 43%. Elena's company has established renewable energy partnerships across the Pacific Northwest. I've spent 9 months learning from experts, understanding the technology, and building the relationships necessary to make this vision a reality. And if it fails? Marcus asked. If it fails, Morrison Tech loses nothing except some time and inconvenience, Elena replied. Northwest Clean Energy absorbs all the financial risk, but based on our analysis and James's track record, failure isn't a realistic outcome. The only question is how much will exceed our projected savings. Tom Morrison stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the Seattle skyline as he considered our proposal. The room remained silent, except for the soft hum of the building's HVAC system, which I couldn't help but notice was probably running inefficiently at that very moment. "I've been in business for 47 years, Tom finally said, turning back to face the room. "I've seen countless proposals that promised revolutionary change, and most of them failed because they were too ambitious or poorly executed. But every once in a while you encounter an idea that's exactly right for its time." He returned to his seat and looked directly at me. "Penelope, your original presentation was compelling but premature. Today's proposal is mature, well-researched, and backed by credible partners. More importantly, it aligns with our long-term sustainability commitments and our shareholders' expectations for cost management." My heart was pounding as I waited for his next words. "I think we should move forward with a pilot program," Tom continued, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "But I want to propose a modification to your timeline. Instead of implementing the system across all 15 buildings simultaneously, let's start with our main office building and expand based on results." "That's actually a better approach," Dr. Thornton agreed. "It allows us to optimize the system and processes before scaling up, which should improve overall results." Sandra was nodding as she reviewed the proposal documents. "This also gives us time to measure impact and refine our partnership structure before committing to the full campus implementation." As the meeting continued, I found myself participating in a completely different kind of conversation than I had experienced 9 months earlier. Instead of defending the feasibility of my idea, I was collaborating with the Morrison Tech team to optimize implementation details. Instead of being dismissed as an overly ambitious employee, I was being treated as an equal partner in a significant business venture. 2 hours later, we shook hands on a preliminary agreement to begin the pilot program within 60 days. As Elena, James, and I gathered our materials to leave, Tom Morrison approached me privately. "Penelope, I want you to know that your original presentation made an impression on me, even though we couldn't move forward at that time," he said quietly. "The fact that you didn't give up, that you found a way to make it happen despite our rejection, tells me everything I need to know about your character and potential." Walking out of the Morrison Tech building that afternoon, I felt like I was finally breathing freely for the first time in months. The same Seattle skyline that had seemed gray and imposing during my original presentation now looked full of possibility. But as exhilarating as the day had been, I knew that the real work was just beginning. 18 months later, I stood in the same conference room where my journey had begun. But everything else had changed completely. The wall-mounted display showed real-time energy consumption data from all 15 Morrison Tech buildings, with green indicators confirming that we were operating at 47% below baseline consumption. The pilot program that had started with a single building had not only exceeded every projection we had made, but had also generated interest from corporations across the country. "The numbers speak for themselves," I said, addressing a room full of Morrison Tech executives, board members, and representatives from 3 potential new clients. In the 18 months since implementation began, Morrison Tech has saved $12.3 million in energy costs. Northwest Clean Energy has recouped our initial investment and generated substantial profit. But more importantly, we've proven that large-scale smart building automation is not only feasible, but incredibly scalable. Tom Morrison sat at the head of the table, beaming with the kind of pride that comes from watching a calculated risk pay off beyond all expectations. Beside him, Sandra Mills was taking notes on her tablet, a far cry from the skeptical executive who had once told me to think smaller. "Penelope, when you first came to us with this idea, I'll admit I thought you were chasing an impossible dream," Sandra said, looking up from her notes. "I'm grateful that you proved me wrong." Elena Vasquez, who had become not just a business partner, but also a mentor and friend, gestured toward the energy consumption dashboard. "What makes these results even more impressive is that we've maintained them while Morrison Tech has expanded their operations by 22%. We're not just saving energy, we're providing a foundation for sustainable growth." Dr. James Thornton, who had relocated to Seattle to oversee the technical implementation, pulled up a series of performance charts. The AI optimization algorithms have exceeded our most optimistic projections. The system has identified and corrected inefficiencies that we never would have detected through manual analysis. Last month alone, we prevented what would have been $43,000 in unnecessary energy consumption. As I listened to James explain the technical achievements, I marveled at how much had changed since that rainy October morning when I had first pitched this idea. The smart building automation system that Morrison Tech had once called unfeasible was now generating so much value that it had become its own business unit within the company. Which brings us to the most exciting development, I continued, clicking to the next slide. Based on the success of our Morrison Tech implementation, we're announcing the formation of Morrison Smart Solutions, a new subsidiary dedicated to providing smart building automation services to other corporations. The room buzzed with excited conversation as I revealed the scope of our expansion plans. Morrison Tech had agreed to invest $15 million in the new subsidiary, with Elena's Northwest Clean Energy maintaining a significant partnership stake. I would serve as CEO, with James as Chief Technology Officer and Elena as Chairman of the board. We currently have signed contracts with 6 major corporations, I announced, including 2 Fortune 500 companies. Combined, these projects represent over $100 million in potential energy savings and substantial revenue for Morrison Smart Solutions. Marcus Webb, who had been notably quiet during my original presentation, stood up to address the room. I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. 2 years ago, Penelope Richardson brought us an idea that we rejected because we couldn't see past our own limitations. Today, that same idea has not only saved our company millions of dollars, but has also created an entirely new revenue stream that employs 37 people across 3 departments. He paused, looking directly at me. This is a reminder that innovation often comes from unexpected places, and that our job as leaders is to recognize potential, even when it challenges our preconceptions. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, but what meant the most to me was seeing the expressions on the faces around the table. These were the same executives who had once dismissed my proposal as too ambitious, too risky, and too far outside their expertise. Now they were celebrating the fact that my unfeasible project had become one of the most successful initiatives in Morrison Tech's history. After the formal presentation ended, I found myself standing by the conference room windows, looking out at the Seattle skyline as the afternoon sun painted the buildings in golden light. The view was the same as it had been during my original presentation, but my perspective had changed completely. Quite a journey from recycling bins to running your own subsidiary, a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to see Tom Morrison approaching, his eyes twinkling with amusement at his reference to Sandra's original suggestion that I focus on smaller projects. I couldn't have imagined any of this 2 years ago, I admitted. When you rejected my original proposal, I thought my career at Morrison Tech was over. Tom chuckled. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a great idea is initial rejection. It forces you to strengthen your vision, build credible partnerships, and prove your commitment. If we had said yes immediately, you might never have connected with Elena or James, and the implementation might not have been nearly as successful. He was probably right, though I wasn't sure I would have appreciated that wisdom during those months of investor meetings and sleepless nights. "What's next for Morrison Smart Solutions?" Tom asked. I pulled out my phone and showed him a map displaying the locations of our current and prospective clients. We're expanding into smart city initiatives, working with municipal governments to optimize energy consumption across entire districts. We're also developing partnerships with renewable energy providers to create integrated sustainability solutions. Ambitious as ever, Tom observed with approval. The difference now is that I know the difference between ambition and feasibility, I replied. I've learned that the biggest ideas require the strongest foundations. As the conference room emptied and our guests headed to the reception that would celebrate the official launch of Morrison Smart Solutions, I remained by the windows for a few more minutes. In the distance, I could see the construction cranes working on Seattle's newest high-rise, a building that would eventually incorporate smart automation systems from the very beginning of its design. Elena joined me at the window, following my gaze toward the construction site. Thinking about the future? Thinking about how impossible all of this seemed 2 years ago, I replied. When I walked out of this room after my original presentation, I never imagined that the same idea would eventually fund 3 entire departments and launch its own subsidiary. The idea was always solid, Elena said. What changed was your ability to execute it. You learned to build partnerships, manage complexity, and deliver results. Those are the skills that transform visions into reality. She was right, of course. The smart building automation concept that I had pitched 24 months earlier was fundamentally the same as the system we had implemented. The difference was everything else: the partnerships that made it possible, the expertise that ensured success, and the business model that made it profitable for everyone involved. As I gathered my materials and prepared to head downstairs for the reception, I took one last look around the conference room where this journey had begun. The mahogany table where I had been told my idea was unfeasible was now surrounded by chairs that had been occupied by executives eager to replicate our success. The windows that had framed my disappointment during that rainy October morning now offered a view of a city full of buildings that could benefit from the solutions we had developed. Walking toward the elevator, I reflected on all the people who had told me to think smaller, to be more realistic, to focus on safer projects with guaranteed outcomes. They hadn't been wrong to be cautious. In the corporate world, feasibility and risk management are essential. But they had overlooked something crucial. Sometimes the most unfeasible ideas are simply ideas that require extraordinary execution to become reality. The elevator doors closed, and I descended toward a reception that would celebrate not just the launch of Morrison Smart Solutions, but the transformation of an impossible dream into a thriving business that was already changing how corporations think about energy consumption and sustainability. In my jacket pocket, my phone buzzed with a text message from a potential client in Chicago. Saw the announcement about Morrison Smart Solutions. Very interested in discussing implementation for our corporate campus. Can we schedule a call next week? I smiled as I typed my response. 2 years ago, nobody wanted to hear about smart building automation. Now, we couldn't keep up with the demand. They had said my project was unfeasible. Today, it funds 3 entire departments and shows no signs of slowing down. More importantly, it's proven that the only difference between an impossible idea and an inevitable success is the courage to keep working until you find the right way to make it happen.